Silence is more than the absence of noise. It is the space in which truth is felt, not thought. And so, I invite you now not to listen with your mind, but to listen with your presence. We live in a world dominated by concepts, ideas, labels, words. We are taught to name everything, to describe, define, and categorize. This flower is beautiful. That person is difficult. This moment is good. That one is bad. But the moment we name something, we have reduced it. We have taken the infinite aliveness of this moment and squeezed it into the narrow box of a concept. A concept is never the thing itself. You can describe the ocean in words, its vastness, its power, its depth, but no description can ever make you wet. The word water will never quench your thirst. In the same way, you can have an idea of love, but that is not love. You can read 1,000 books about awakening, but that is not presence. The finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. We must become aware that every concept is a tool, not a truth. Useful, perhaps, for communication, but dangerous when mistaken for reality. The mind likes to understand. It seeks security in knowledge. But there is a deeper knowing, one that doesn't come through thinking, but through being. Concepts reduce reality into labels. This is one of the most overlooked dynamics of the human experience. From a very early age, we are taught to name things. We are told, this is a tree, that is a dog, this is your name. And so begins the mind's journey into a world not of direct experience, but of symbols and abstractions. We are conditioned to look at life not as it is, but through the filter of the conceptual mind. What this does, without our awareness, is create a separation between us and the living reality of the present moment. When you see a flower and call it a rose, what has actually happened? Instantly, the mind retrieves an entire library of associations related to that word, what roses symbolize, what they cost, whether you like them, and so on. You stop seeing the rose as it is, and you start seeing your idea of it. The freshness, the wonder, the simple beauty of the flower is bypassed because the mind believes it already knows. This mechanism, while practical in many situations, becomes a barrier to true perception. Concepts are efficient for communication, but they are poor substitutes for actual experience. The word sunset can never convey the feeling of standing in silence as the sky turns to fire and gold. The concept of love is not the same as the warmth of holding a child in your arms or the stillness of sitting beside someone in deep understanding. The word pain may describe an event, but it will never fully embody the sensation that moves through your body in a given moment. And yet, we live as though the words are enough. We trade direct experience for mental shortcuts, and in doing so, we miss life. The danger lies in believing the label is the thing. When we say someone is selfish, we've reduced their entire being into one judgment. We've stripped away their complexity, their struggle, their humanity, and placed them neatly into a mental box. When we call something boring, we've already decided it has no value, and so we no longer pay attention. Attention dies the moment a concept takes over. The aliveness of the moment is flattened by the weight of mental commentary. This process not only limits how we see others in the world, but also how we see ourselves. When you say, I am anxious, I am not good enough, I am a failure, you are not describing who you truly are. You are describing a thought. But when you believe the thought, it becomes your identity. You live inside the boundaries of the label, unaware that you are much larger than any concept the mind can form. The true self is not an idea, it is not an image, it is not a personality. It is the silent presence beneath all of that, the awareness in which thoughts, feelings and experiences arise and fall. Concepts create a sense of familiarity, but this familiarity is deceptive. It prevents us from seeing the newness of each moment. Every day the sky is different, every face changes, every breath is fresh, but when we rely on mental labels, we stop noticing. We look without seeing, listen without hearing, and touch without feeling. Life becomes a routine, not because it is repetitive, but because the mind turns it into repetition. This reduction of reality into concepts also manifests in spiritual and philosophical contexts. People say, God, enlightenment, or truth, as though these words encapsulate the essence of what they point to. But these are just fingers pointing towards something vast and unknowable. The moment we think we understand, we've already lost it. The mystery cannot be captured by thought. It can only be met in stillness, in direct presence, free of interpretation. The tendency to label is deeply ingrained in human consciousness. It is a form of control, a way the mind tries to grasp the ungraspable. But life is not something to be understood through concepts. It is something to be experienced. A tree is not the word tree. A feeling is not the word sadness. You are not your name, your age, your occupation. All of these are surface identities, useful in a functional sense, but hollow when it comes to the deeper question of what you truly are. The moment you recognize that concepts are merely shadows, you begin to awaken to the light behind them. The mind seeks security in knowledge, not truth. This is a subtle but profound pattern in human consciousness. From childhood, we are encouraged to gather information, accumulate facts, and form conclusions. The more we know, the more capable and in control we feel. But the kind of knowledge the mind seeks is not always rooted in truth. It is rooted in certainty, in familiarity, in the illusion of stability. Truth by its nature is not always comfortable. It is vast, open, alive, and often beyond what the mind can fully grasp. Knowledge, on the other hand, offers a sense of containment. It gives us labels, theories, systems. It gives us something to hold on to. The mind does not like not knowing. It resists ambiguity. It wants answers, definitions, explanations. When something unfamiliar arises, a situation, a feeling, an experience, the mind immediately tries to categorize it, to name it, to put it into a box. This is not a search for understanding in its purest sense. It is a defense mechanism, because in not knowing, the ego feels threatened, it feels exposed, vulnerable, unstable. And so the mind races to find something, anything, that can reestablish a sense of control. Knowledge becomes a structure within which the ego feels safe. But this safety is artificial, it is a construct. What is known becomes a kind of psychological furniture we arrange around ourselves. We live inside these mental rooms, decorated with opinions, memories, and beliefs. But rarely do we step outside to see what is actually here, now, without the filter of what we think we know. The mind's security in knowledge is like a child clutching a map and believing he understands the entire terrain, while never once stepping into the forest. This craving for conceptual certainty is why people cling so tightly to beliefs, whether religious, political, or personal. Beliefs give the mind something solid. Even if the belief is painful or limiting, it provides identity. It gives shape to the self-image. I believe this. I am this kind of person. I know how the world works. These thoughts give structure to the ego, but truth has no structure. It flows, it shifts, it reveals itself moment by moment. It doesn't conform to the rigid frameworks the mind creates. This is also why spiritual teachings can be easily misused by the mind. Instead of allowing teachings to lead one into direct experience, the mind often turns them into more conceptual knowledge. It memorizes ideas like presence, ego, or awakening, and begins to speak of them as if understanding them intellectually is the same as living them. But truth is not something that can be stored. It is not a possession. It is not an idea. It is alive only now, only here. When the mind clings to spiritual knowledge, it can become just another layer of ego, subtler, perhaps, but still a defense against the unknown. The real invitation is not to accumulate more knowledge, but to become deeply comfortable with not knowing, to allow space, to let the moment unfold without rushing to define it. This requires trust, not in the mind, but in awareness itself, trust in life as it is without mental commentary. When we stop looking for certainty, we begin to encounter truth in a different way. It comes not through effort, but through surrender, not through analysis, but through presence. The security the mind seeks in knowledge is ultimately a form of escape. It is a way of avoiding the rawness of life, the unpredictability, the mystery, the fluidity of existence. We turn to concepts because we fear the open sky. We build walls of thought to shield ourselves from the wind of the unknown. But in doing so, we also block the light. The more we rely on mental conclusions, the less we see with clarity. The more we need to understand, the more we limit what can be experienced directly. There is a vast difference between knowing about something and knowing it directly. You can study love endlessly, read poetry and psychology, but until your heart opens in a moment of presence, you do not know love. You can understand the science of nature, but until you sit in silence and feel the wind move through the trees without needing to name it, you have not truly touched nature. Real knowing arises not from accumulation, but from stillness. It does not come from seeking, but from letting go. The mind cannot grasp it, because it is not something to be grasped. It is something to be entered. True presence begins where thinking ends. This is not a rejection of thought, but a recognition of its limits. Thought has its place in the practical world, to plan, to build, to communicate, but it is not the gateway to the depth of life. Thinking cannot touch the stillness of the present moment. It can only reflect, anticipate, analyze, and in doing so it often becomes noise. The mind talks constantly, rehearsing the past, anticipating the future, evaluating what is happening now. This stream of inner commentary creates a barrier between us and the direct experience of being. Presence is not a mental activity. It does not arise from trying to be present. It is what remains when the mental noise subsides, even for a brief moment. In those moments of silence, when you're not thinking about life, but simply in it, there is a sense of peace, spaciousness. How do you clarity? The sky becomes more vivid, the breath more alive, the body more real. You are not evaluating the moment. You are not resisting it or grasping at it. You are simply aware. This is presence. It is not something you do. It is what you are when you are not lost in thought. Most people live in a continuous state of mental identification. They do not see the world as it is. They see it through the lens of their thoughts about it. Every experience is filtered through judgment, expectation, memory. This inner monologue creates a sense of separation. Me here, the world out there. But this separation is an illusion sustained by thinking. When thought stops, even briefly, the boundaries dissolve. There is just this moment, this awareness, this breath. And in that space, you are not separate from life, you are life. It is in this state of presence that true peace is found, not the peace that depends on circumstances, but the peace that is untouched by conditions. It is the peace that arises when there is no resistance to what is. Thinking always tries to change or escape the moment. It says, this isn't enough, something's missing, I need to get somewhere, but presence has no agenda. It is already whole. It does not seek fulfillment in the next moment because it sees that fulfillment is here now, not as a concept, but as a felt reality. When you are present, you begin to notice how much of your thinking is unnecessary. So many thoughts are repetitive, anxious, self-referential. They do not solve problems. They create them. They do not bring clarity. They obscure it. The mind believes that without constant thinking, nothing would function. But when you enter the space of presence, you discover that intelligence arises from stillness. The most profound insights, the most creative actions, the most compassionate responses, they all emerge when the mind is quiet and awareness is alert. In presence, there is no need to interpret. You do not need to label what you see or justify what you feel. You simply allow the moment to be as it is. There is a deep acceptance, not as a mental strategy, but as a natural state. And in this acceptance, there is great power. You are no longer reactive, no longer caught in the habitual patterns of the conditioned mind. You act not from fear or compulsion, but from a place of inner clarity. Thinking can be a servant, but when it becomes the master, it creates suffering. The voice in the head is rarely content. It is always reaching, grasping, resisting. Presence, on the other hand, is silent. It does not need to prove anything, defend anything, or acquire anything. It is simply aware, and this awareness is not passive. It is vibrant, alive, deeply intelligent. Children, animals, and even nature itself exist naturally in presence. They do not live through concepts. They do not carry the weight of past and future. They respond to what is moment by moment. This is not naivety. It is wisdom. It is a wisdom that is not learned but remembered. It is already within us, buried beneath the layers of thought and identity we've constructed. To enter presence, you do not need to go anywhere. You simply return to what is already here, the breath moving in and out, the sensations in the body, the sounds in the space around you. These are not things to think about, but gateways into the now. When you rest your attention in them without commentary, thinking slows, and as thinking slows, a deeper awareness emerges, quiet, spacious, grounded. It is in this awareness that true presence lives. Words are pointers, not the experience itself. Language is a tool, a set of symbols created by the human mind to describe and communicate what is observed. But words are not the things they describe. They are not the living reality. They are signs, markers, placeholders. They can guide attention towards something, but they can never become the thing itself. The word ski is not the sky. The word love is not the felt experience of love. The word peace is not peace. These are all representations, but the representation is not the reality. Human beings have become so accustomed to thinking and speaking in words that we often mistake the label for the thing. This confusion limits perception. When a child sees a bird for the first time, there is awe, aliveness, a sense of wonder. But the moment someone says, "That is a bird," and the child stores the word in memory, the freshness of the experience begins to fade. The next time the child sees the same creature, it is no longer new, it is already known. The mind says, "I know this," and the experience is filtered through the concept. But in truth, no two birds are the same. No moment is the same. Life is never repeating itself. Only the mind repeats. This habit of reducing life to words is deeply ingrained. It helps us navigate the world. Yes, but it also creates a layer of abstraction. Most people live not in reality, but in a world of mental constructs. They speak about life, think about life, describe life, but rarely meet life directly, without the interference of thought. The moment something is named, the mind feels it understands, but real understanding does not come through mental labels. It comes through presence, through direct perception, through stillness. When spiritual traditions use words like God, being, truth, or awakening, these are not definitions. They are pointers. They are meant to nudge the listener toward an experience that lies beyond thought. But the mind often grasps the word and holds on to it as if it were the thing. People debate the meaning of these words, argue over doctrines, build ideologies. But the truth that these words attempt to describe cannot be contained by them. It is like mistaking the menu for the meal. You can read every word on the page, but unless you taste the food, you do not know. The limitation of words is that they fragment reality. They break the seamless flow of life into separate objects and events. This is a tree, that is a cloud. This is me, that is you. The naming process creates the illusion of separation. But in the stillness, beneath the words, there is only unity. There is only this undivided, unconditioned presence. Language cannot reach this place. It can gesture toward it, but it cannot enter. It is like standing outside a temple and describing its beauty without ever stepping inside. The greatest teachers throughout history have understood the power and limitation of words. They used language sparingly, poetically, and often paradoxically. They spoke in ways that disrupted habitual thinking rather than reinforced it. Silence, pauses, even the sound of their voice carried more transmission than the literal meaning of their words. Because the teaching was never in the words, it was in the space the words pointed to. It was in the stillness between the lines. It was in the presence from which the words arose. When you read a profound sentence or hear a deep teaching, notice what happens within you. There may be a moment of recognition, a stillness, a sense of expansion. That is the truth being touched, not by the word itself, but by your awareness beyond the word. The word is the doorway. Presence is what walks through. Even the word presence is just another pointer. It is not the experience itself. You do not become present by repeating the word. You become present by noticing what is here before the word arises. Feel the breath. Listen to the sounds. Sense the aliveness in the body. These are not things to describe or judge. They are openings. And the more you rest in that direct experience, the more you begin to see how often the mind turns living reality into static ideas. Words are useful, but they are not sacred. What is sacred is the awareness that precedes them, the stillness in which they appear, the silence to which they eventually return. To know this directly is to begin living in a way that is no longer dominated by concepts. You still use words, but you are no longer used by them. You speak, but your words come from a deeper place, no longer separate from life, but arising from it. The more attached you are to your ideas, the more blind you become to reality. Ideas are not inherently wrong or harmful. They can be insightful, creative, and even transformative when they arise from stillness and clarity. But when ideas become fixed, when they harden into rigid beliefs, identities, and opinions, they begin to obstruct perception. They no longer serve as tools for understanding, but instead become filters that distort what is actually here. The mind clings to its views because they offer a sense of certainty, a feeling of control. But life is not bound by ideas. Life flows freely, unpredictably, and constantly renews itself. Ideas cannot contain the vastness of what is. Attachment to ideas is often subtle. It hides in the language of certainty. I know, I'm right. This is how things are. These phrases may seem harmless, but they point to a deeper identification with thought. The ego builds itself through mental positions. This is my opinion. This is my belief. This is what I stand for. And once the ego identifies with a thought, it will defend that thought as if it were defending its own life. This is the root of much human conflict, both personal and collective. People are not really fighting each other. They are fighting for the survival of their mental constructs. The problem is not that we have ideas, but that we believe we are our ideas. This identification narrows awareness. It creates a psychological framework through which all experience is interpreted. Instead of meeting life as it is, we meet it through the lens of what we think it should be. This leads to frustration, resistance, and suffering. When reality does not match the mind's expectations, there is discomfort. But the discomfort does not come from reality itself. It comes from the mind's refusal to let go of its version of reality. Letting go of attachment to ideas does not mean abandoning discernment or becoming passive. It means holding thoughts lightly, recognizing them as passing forms within consciousness, not absolute truths. When you see a thought for what it is, a movement in the mind, a pattern of language and memory, you no longer take it so seriously. You can still think, you can still form ideas, but you are no longer imprisoned by them. There is space between you and the thought. In that space there is freedom. The more you observe your thoughts without identifying with them, the more you begin to see how conditioned they are. So many of your ideas were not born of your own direct experience. They were inherited, absorbed from culture, family, media, and education. They operate like background programs, shaping your perceptions and reactions without your conscious awareness. Only when you become still enough to witness them do you realize how deeply they've colored your view of the world. This witnessing is the beginning of inner clarity. It is the shift from being inside the thought to observing the thought from awareness. And when this shift happens, a deeper intelligence begins to emerge. This intelligence is not reactive, not bound by the past, not limited to concepts. It responds freshly to each moment. It sees with open eyes, without the distortion of mental filters. This seeing is not the product of analysis. It is the result of presence. It takes courage to let go of attachment to ideas, especially those that form the core of your identity. Who are you without your beliefs, your positions, your story? The ego fears that without these it will be nothing. But what you are is not a collection of thoughts. What you are is the awareness in which those thoughts arise. This awareness is untouched by concepts. It does not need to defend itself because it has nothing to protect. It simply is. When you are no longer bound by fixed ideas, there is a softness in your way of being. You become more open, more receptive, more curious. You listen more deeply. You observe more clearly. You allow others to be as they are without needing to categorize or judge them. Dialogue becomes possible. Growth becomes natural. Compassion arises not as a moral stance, but as a natural expression of spacious awareness. Ideas can be beautiful expressions of insight, but they must remain fluid. Like water, they must be allowed to move, change, dissolve, and reform. When they become frozen, they become barriers. They block the flow of life. But when you hold them loosely, they become instruments of connection rather than division. They serve consciousness rather than substitute for it. In this way, thought regains its rightful place, not as master, but as servant of awareness. When the mind becomes quiet, a deeper knowing arises. This knowing does not come from thought, memory, or analysis. It is not something you figure out or arrive at through effort. It is already present beneath the surface of thinking, like the still depths of the ocean beneath the waves. The mind, with all its movement and noise, often distracts from this deeper dimension. But when the chatter of thought subsides, even slightly, awareness expands. There is a clarity that is not of the intellect, a direct seeing that requires no interpretation. This is not the kind of knowledge that can be taught or written down. It cannot be acquired, only revealed, because it is already here, waiting in the silence of presence. This deeper knowing is not concerned with facts or information. It is not about accumulating more. It is the recognition of what is free from mental filters and judgments. In everyday language, we use the word knowing to refer to mental grasping. To say, I know often means I've named it, I've categorized it, but true knowing is not conceptual, it is experiential, it is intimate, it arises from being, not thinking. You know the wind not by describing it, but by feeling it on your skin. You know love not by defining it, but by being it. You know yourself not through stories, but through awareness of presence. To access this deeper knowing, you must become still, not as a technique or a goal, but as a surrender of resistance. Stillness is not something you do, it is what remains when doing ceases. In that stillness, the compulsive need to understand, explain, and control begins to dissolve. And as it dissolves, something timeless opens up within you. This is not a void or emptiness in the negative sense, but a spaciousness that is full of potential, full of life. It is the space in which all things arise and pass. It is the background of all experience. Most people have touched this dimension, even if they didn't name it. It can come in a moment of awe, when the mind falls silent in the presence of beauty. It can come in deep grief. When thinking breaks down and only raw presence remains, it can come in the quiet of early morning, when the world has not yet imposed itself. These are glimpses, but the invitation is to live from this place more often, not as an escape from life, but as a return to it. Thought is useful, but it cannot take you there. Only awareness can. This deeper knowing has no urgency. It does not push or pull. It waits patiently for you to notice it. It is always available, always here, but it cannot be grasped. The moment you try to seize it with the mind, it slips away. It reveals itself only in surrender, in the gap between thoughts, in the breaths you actually feel, in the silence that is not empty but alive. This is why practices like meditation are helpful, not as ends in themselves, but as ways of softening the grip of thought. As thought loses its dominance, this deeper awareness begins to shine through more clearly. There is intelligence in this awareness, a kind of wisdom that cannot be reasoned out. It knows without knowing how it knows. This is the intelligence that moves nature, that heals the body, that guides the seasons. It is the same intelligence that breathes you, that beats your heart. You are not separate from it. You are it when the identification with the thinking mind dissolves. In this space, life is no longer something happening to you. You are not merely a thinker observing the world. You are the space in which the world appears. You are the stillness out of which sound arises. You are the awareness behind every experience. This is not a philosophy to believe in, but a reality to return to. You do not need to understand it to access it. You simply need to be quiet enough to hear it, not with your ears, but with your whole being. This kind of listening is not passive. It is deeply alert. It is the openness that allows what is to be as it is. From this openness, wisdom arises. Not the kind of wisdom that quotes scriptures or recites knowledge, but the wisdom that responds to life from stillness, that sees clearly without judgment, that acts without fear. This deeper knowing is not distant or mysterious. It is the most natural thing. it is what remains when you stop trying to know and simply allow yourself to be. In that being, in that quiet presence, you realize you are not lost. You were never separate. You do not need to search far and wide for truth. It is here where you are, in the simple awareness of this moment, in the stillness beneath the thoughts, in the silence that listens,